Hey there, everybody. Welcome to my channel, The Magical Solution. My name is Lailani. Woo! It is the last Sunday of November. We are entering a pretty crazy time of year. And during these times when I feel so lost and don't know what the heck to do and don't know what to talk about and don't know where the world is going and don't know where I'm going, I like to call Professor WHAM. And she is amazing guest. I like to refer to her as an encyclopedia. Seriously, this woman knows what I feel every but you can get some yourself. Now, Professor she is an author, a researcher, a scholar, a graduate degrees, religious studies, and American cultural studies, specialized in the history of revelatory texts, prophetic and vision experiences, race, gender, and the history of religion in the United States. In addition, she has studied paranormal and mystical experiences for over 40 years, received spiritual training from traditional authorities in Jewish Kabbalah, Vajrayana Buddhism, yes, as well as Northern European and North American Indigenous traditions. Her personal spirituality blends elements of all of these within the eclecticism of Universal Sufi tradition transmitted by Hazrat Inayat Khan, hopefully I said that right, in which she has been recently elevated to the position of master teacher and initiator within the Inayati lineage of the Sufi Ruhaniat International. Oh, I hope I didn't butcher those, but whoa, what a bio, right? Listen, Professor WHAM is one of our favorite guests here at The Magical Solution. If you haven't already seen the two previous interviews we have done, I highly suggest you go back. The reason why she's one of my favorite guests and one of the few people that I love to just speak to for hours on end, which, by the way, heads up, if you guys are joining us here tonight, we're not stopping at an hour. If we need to go over, we are going over. That's just how the ball is going to drop, okay? But the reason why is just because the information that ends up being spoken about here isn't just, historical and educational. It isn't just spiritual. I mean, these are real life nuggets of wisdom that can help us in our day to day. And it can also help us to interpret the world around us in all of its chaos. And I think that's one of the reasons why I appreciate Professor WHAM so much. So without further ado, let's bring her on, because honestly, I could sit here and just talk about her for an hour. Hey!
That's quite an intro, right?
Professor WHAM, thank you so much for joining us tonight, man. I really appreciate you being here. It's always a pleasure.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. You know that.
Yeah, the first one that we did was, the Nazis taking over, the Nordic sort of Norse pagan. Yeah, and that was a big one. We did that, and boy, did that stir up the pot, let me tell you. And then our second live was insane. It had to do with, human trafficking and magic and occultism in government spaces and places of power. And I mean, we got into all kinds of stuff, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that today is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit different because we're going to be focusing a little bit more on a spirit that recently made herself known to me, which is why I reached out to you, Professor WHAM. I've had a series of strange events occur to me, with me, where this spirit, Hela, made herself known, wanted to send some messages, and it had me feeling some type of way, because as a person of Indigenous background, BIPOC background, Latin background, all the things, it was hard for me to go, well, yeah, I don't know what to do with, a Nordic spirit or a Greco-Roman spirit or an Irish spirit, or, I didn't know what to do with that part of myself. Although it's in me somewhere, I didn't know how to respond to that. And so the first person I thought about was you. And I just have to appreciate the wisdom that you're about to bestow. And the first question I'm going to ask is, who is hell? Like, who is she as a spirit? The very little I was able to research, there's not much, and the little bit that you do see, there's contradictories in terms of her birth, in terms of where she comes from. And so I'm just curious, based on your studies, who is hell? Who is she?
Well, it's an interesting question, because her attestations are mostly linguistic. They are mostly there. There are a few mentions of her in the written mythology, which is the mythology that came down to us that we have. And in order to talk about her, or the realm in which she inhabits, because in many ways she's actually a personification of a realm, of a state of being. And so in order to talk about her, you also have to talk about souls, the different types of souls that are implied in the Northern European tradition. You have to talk about Balder, who was the Norse god who died as a result of machinations by Loki, and one of Odin's sons, and ended up in hell rather than in one of the warrior afterlives.
Right.
And actually, hell is where most of us go. I think it probably, unless you're a warrior and you're picked by Freya or Odin, this is in the mythology. But I think it's important to understand the linguistic roots of what the word hell means, because when we say the word hell, it has a certain connotation now.
It sure does.
And that connotation is kind of a deliberate obfuscation by Christian authorities, because the word hell actually in Scandinavian, and for example, Old Dutch, for example, just means a deep place, an occulted place, like a hollow. Like, in fact, not too far from where I live, there's like a deep gorge in between two parts of the ridge of Hussey's Hill, which is it's the local name for a hill over here. And it's simply, if you look at old maps, it's simply called the hell. And what that means is it's just the deep place. It's just the deep place in Old Dutch. So from what all linguistic indications are, is that what hell originally was what we would call now the underworld. It was the place where most of the dead go and reside. It was not a bad place. In fact, when Balder lives there, he lives there with his wife, and there's a whole court and a whole,
they're having a good time at the table and shit.
So it's not like a bad place.
Right.
And according to the stories, Hela, or Hel, the goddess figure, who is pictured as being, half beautiful and half a corpse, is one of the children of Loki. He gave birth to, because he liked to mix and match genders, and he gave birth to a number of children, and all of them play important roles in various ways during Ragnarok, the end of days, the Norse end of days, which is different than the Greek end of days, or the Christian or Jewish or Muslim end of days, obviously. And so what is interesting is that it isn't clear in the written myths, it isn't clear what role hell plays, but she obviously plays some role, because Balder resurrects. He's the only god who does that. He, at the end of Ragnarok, he resurrects out of hell. So that is some indication that that the realm of hell is more than just a place where the dead hang out. And one book that I would recommend for you, actually there's several, but the book that I would recommend for readers,
Write this down, guys. Okay.
Heathen Soul Lore Foundations by Winifred Hodge Rose. She is the only place where you can get this is through lulu.com. Because they're the publishing branch of the Troth. And what is useful about this book is that she's just a regular person. I mean, she's not like, she doesn't have like 7 zillion credentials like me, but she's actually done more of the linguistic work than I have because she's had time. And she does 2 things in this book. She takes a very, very deep dive into what the language can tell us about the nature of the soul, and how souls are constructed. And automatically that led her to doing a deep dive into hell, into who Hela is, not only as the goddess, but as a realm. And it's, it's got both, her personal gnosis stuff in it, but it also has as much linguistic stuff in it as you can possibly sort of get your handle around. And she's done them together. And I think that a lot of her insights are very interesting. I mean, it's given me a lot of food for thought. Because there were things that she uncovered linguistically that I actually didn't know anything about personally. And I use her book along with this book here, which I have mentioned before, The Seed of Yggdrasil by Maria Philhag. You see how big this book is, and you can get this on Amazon. It's massive. It's like 900 pages long. I don't even know how they got it all in one. He's a Danish scholar. And what's important about what she does is that she's in the process of, and she does have graduate degrees, by the way, in the languages and stuff. But what's important about what she's doing is that she's going back through the stories and instead of a lot of the translations of the Icelandic that we have were done in the late 19th or early 20th century by men who were very, very much affected by the sort of Marvel comic Victorian.
Yeah, I was going to say that late in history.
Wow. Victorian view of language and of the gods and all that kind of stuff. And what she's done is she's actually gone back and done pretty in-depth linguistic studies to try to rehab. She's part of a new group of scholars that are doing this that will unseat people like Stephen Flowers.
I hear you.
And basically, while she talks about hell only in a few places, like where the myths talk about him, about her, what's important is that, because I was thinking about Balder, what's important is that what her goal is, is to try to reconstruct logical ceremonies and rituals that people would have done. Given what we know about ceremonies, what has survived, and what the linguistic record seems to imply, and I appreciate that a lot about her. She does a lot of gender work. Because that's actually implied in the language in ways that are different than have been handed down to us, and it gives us a different view of the gods, a different view of social relationships, and to me that's really important, because for all of the talk of colonization or decolonization, that whole colonization crap really started in Europe. And if Europe is going to be engaged in decolonization, it has to do that within its own soul as well.
Oof, say it.
And so that's part of the work that she's very much involved in.
That's fun.
But anyway, so those are the two that I would recommend immediately for people who might be interested in hell. But what I wanted to share with you when I was looking back, well, first of all, why don't you tell people about
Let's do it.
Tell your people about your hell experiences, and then
Yeah.
I'll tell you about what happened with when a book flung itself off a shelf at me.
Crazy. It was crazy. I went to an event to be on a few panels and teach a few classes, and I met an individual there who would consider himself a Nordic shaman, who practices those practices, and he and I were both on a panel about divination. We were both very fascinated by each other's different types of divination, and so we agreed to exchange a reading. So I met him up in his room, but before I went up there, one of the young ladies who was in the audience of that panel about divination said to me, I couldn't help but to start drawing this picture. I was being told to draw this picture, and very specifically, and I was told that it was for you. And I'm like, okay, well, thank you. And so she takes out the picture, and this picture at first got me a little off guard. I was like, what the fuck? It was a picture of a half-faced woman. So one half was beautiful and the other half was janked up. And I'm like, thank you. Like, I didn't know how to receive that. And she goes, yeah, but I also wrote a prayer on the back. They dictated a prayer, like a poem on the back. And I'm like, okay. And so I turn it over. She reads this poem, and it has everything to do with like the hidden one and things being revealed and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, like this is so dope, but like, I don't know what to make of it. So thank you. And then I went upstairs, and I went up there to go get my reading and do the exchange. So I get up there, we have this reading, and he goes first.
Right.
And lo and behold, does she show up quite loudly in that reading, by name, and has a very specific message for me. And at the time, there was some past life sort of traumas that I was dealing with subconsciously. I didn't know that I was dealing with these traumas that were of my past life. I just knew that these were fears that I had. These were PTSD type, deeply ingrained fears that I felt I either lived before or I'm about to go through in the future. Either way, I'm terrified of this thing. And in this reading, this dear guy says to me that hell is basically like, you need to release that. Like, you give that to me. Give me those past life fears, because they don't belong to you in this world. And I was like, holy shit, but like, how do I do that? And so, of course, I immediately went to you. And I mean, there's so much more to this story. It definitely goes a lot deeper than that. But that was the crust of it. That was really the part that like hit me dead in my face. And I had to find out at least some little nuggets of like making some kind of sense of all of that. And so while we were talking about it, Professor WHAM, literally a fat book flies off of her shelf and like almost like hits her, like just flies off of her shelf. And she tells me about it. And I'm like, what?
Well,
so what is that book? What's the
book?
Well,
it's not a fat book, but it's a book that basically the reason, and I've told you this, it's this book by Whitley Strieber, Transformation. This is his second volume in his Visitor series, where he talks about his experiences, where he thought they were at first extraterrestrials, and then he realized that they are something else. And what's important about this book is the reason it's called Transformation for him is because this is the book which describes how his relationship with that those entities, and that experience changed from one of horror and fear and trauma to a spiritual inquiry. Essentially, is the best way to put it.
Wow. What?
So that's part. I mean, that's part of what makes the book interesting. But the reason I kept it is because it contains an appendix in which it talks about something that happened during the regression of the past, or not past life regression, the hypnotic regression of Betty Andreas and Luca, who is a very well-known abductee. And it was during it happened in the 1970s, late 70s, when her abduction case was being investigated. And so they had hypnotized her to see if they could help her remember her experience. Now, it has to be said, because this was a factor that people were thinking of at the time, that Betty was, she has passed now, and I actually had conversations with her, so I think of her a little bit more personally. But she was of Finnish extraction. She was a Finnish ethnic background, and but she was Pentecostal in her private practice, in her religious practice, and quite devout. So she was accustomed to speaking in tongues. She knew about all of that stuff. So when she was being regressed and she started speaking these weird syllables, they just, the researchers just assumed it was some kind of glossolalia that was being brought on by the trauma of her experience. So they recorded it and just kind of let it go. But later on, a scholar was listening to it, because she was being investigated by other academics as well. And he felt like he recognized what was being said, but he couldn't place it. So he had a friend of his who was a linguist listen to it. And they realized that what it sounded like was some kind of archaic Irish Gaelic. And so they listened, they listened carefully and phonetically pulled out all of the syllables. And this scholar, this linguist who knows this language, was able to render a translation. So that was the translation I read to you. And that's the main reason I keep this book, because what we're really talking about when talking about Hela is we're talking both as a goddess and as a realm, because hell is part of a deeper subset of realms. Niflheim, Niflheimer, Muspelheimer, and Hell are all part of, kind of in the same place on Yggdrasil, the tree of life, the cosmic tree. And what that indicates is that's where fire and ice reside. And so what that means is that hell is like the crucible. It is the place where souls go, but it is also the place where alchemy occurs. So that, kind of like in compost, when you put refuse in a compost bin and it ferments and then it becomes something that something can grow in. That's kind of what hell is. At least according to Winifred, that's sort of how what the linguistics have indicated to her. But anyway, this prophecy out of this book that was translated from these words that were said by Betty Andreas and Luca. The living descendants of the northern peoples are groping in universal darkness. Their mother mourns. A dark occasion forebodes when weakness in high places will revive a high cost of living, an interval of mistakes in high places, an interval fit for distressing events.
Stop right there. Oh my God. Can everyone just kind of let that marinate a little bit? Because you just said so much. Which, by the way, you guys, we were not able to do a pre-interview, so you're getting all of this right now, raw, just as the way that I'm getting it right now. So, give me a minute while I process my thoughts for the proper questions to ask. But the part where you had said that this is, a place of fire and ice, sort of like this alchemical crucible, right? It reminds me very much, because whenever people think about the afterworld or death in general, or any spirit associated with death, there's usually there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of projection on what that all means. And to get an image all of a sudden now that says it's less about a place of torment due to your meritorious actions or immoral actions, and more of like a place of transmutation, a place where the souls go to get purged and purified and alchemized and all that before. Now, do we believe in reincarnation here in this world, in the realm of the Nordic tradition?
Oh, well, it's interesting. Let me, because in the language, there are each person in this realm is actually a hybrid of several different types of soul, and this is what Winifred Hodge Rose has uncovered, and that's kind of what I wanted to share with you, because this was way beyond what Christians could get, obviously, and this is what the language and even aspects of the mythology imply once you actually start reading it in its original language, those languages, which is part of the reason why it's so important to do this linguistic work. Just to kind of simplify it a little bit, there are two types, roughly, and this is, again, there are two types of kinds of soul, two categories, if you will, of soul. There are the life souls, and this is according to Winifred Rose. I mean, she's the one who's come up with these categories. So I'm using her rubric because I think it's useful. There are life souls, and then there are what are called wandering souls. And I'll tell you what the difference between those are. And all of us have both of these categories in us. Okay. So if we're just talking about life souls, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6
subcategories
of soul. These are considered to be separate kinds of energies, if you will. For humans, well, there is. I'll just read you what I wrote because I was summarizing her thought. The first is called Farah, and this is a kind of life force that was transferred to humans when humans were created. It was transferred to humans from trees when humans were created. It's actually considered to be a life force that all beings share. But when humans were created, we were, in the stories, we were created from trees. That's what all the Norse myths say, all the Scandinavian myths say. And this should give you a sense of how important being in the forest was, that humans share a kind of life force with trees specifically. And so that's, in the same way that, in the Bible, God breathes the breath of life into humans. So trees,
which makes so much more sense
to humans. And so that's what made us humans. But all living things contain this force. And what's interesting is that it seems to be connected to all kinds of root words that in the old Indo-European, there's a root radical, perku, which means life force. So it's very similar to like chi, that idea of that kind of life force that everything has. And there's a wonderful Anglo-Saxon word that she talks about where it talks about the Farah, which literally means the kindred of the living beings who share Farah. So it's Anglo-Saxon preserved a lot of these formulations that then fell out of the Scandinavian languages, which is part of the reason why I ended up studying Anglo-Saxon much more than I did, say, Norwegian or Swedish, because that, as those languages modernized, a lot of these archaic things kind of fell out of them. So there's Farah, which is like life force, and then there is something that it seems to be cognate to the idea of Atman, in Sanskrit, and is Achma. It's the focus channel that connects humans to higher or other realms. In other words, it's what connects us maybe to the upper world, to the upper realms, to the stars. And that is separate from Farah. So it has to do with that is something that was bestowed on human beings at some point in human development.
You mean the Akma was bestowed at some point?
Akma, yeah. So, we have the life force, the physical life force, and then we have Akma. Yeah. There are other beings that can have Akma too.
Yeah.
Excuse me, that are implied. But usually linguistically it focuses on humans. Then there is the word that we get the term ghost from, which is actually guest. And it's actually understood to be a kind of membrane that enfolds the Akma and may allow itself to present separately from time to time.
My God.
It can perhaps contain memories of Akma, or can remain in a place as a sort of resonance. So, it's the kind of thing that, so basically it sort of interacts with, it sort of like interacts between the body and the life force and this connection to upper realms. It's like a container, and it can become detached from time to time.
Yes.
And wander around.
Yes. So it's interesting. Okay, if we can compare it, because many people in my audience, we come from, the Afro-Caribbean types of traditions, and so if you were to compare it to Espiritismo, if you were to compare it to spiritualism, this idea. So if I can use the terminology, this idea of Farah would be considered like the internal flame, right? That little life source that we all contain in order to be alive. Like without it we wouldn't be alive, right? And then you have your guest, which would be our spirit, our peri spirit. And this peri spirit very much takes on sort of the personality of the person, the characteristics of the person. It's the thing that's responsible for going out in dream worlds, astral travel, things like it can get lost in spaces in different realms.
Right.
But ultimately it's the spirit. And then you have what we would consider the soul, but maybe there's another word for it in Nordic, but in our tradition it would be the soul. And there are some traditions within spiritualism and within Spiritismo where they say not everyone has a soul. A soul is something that you are elevated to the status of, or maybe given to you at some point in your life. So it's interesting. I'm seeing a lot of these similarities, but you said 6. We only did 3.
Right. Well, and just to add on to what you were saying, there are individuals who have the ability to project that, and there's actually there are several specific words for that in Norse. One of them is like if in shamanism, if you're projecting into an animal or you become an animal form, then that term is called a filia. And that's not understood to be a soul. That's understood to be a connection between you and an animal that you have. And it's very much like a Patronus in Harry Potter. It's an animal form that kind of represents your essence, your true essence in a certain way. And it can be projected outward to perform things for you. And that's not considered a soul in the same way, because that can be developed. A filia can be developed. over time. So, okay, so we did the ghost. So then there's our body. Our body is considered to have its own soul, and it's called the Hama. And there are actually several divisions to Hama. So, for example, and I'm not going to go into all the divisions, but like, for example, Licha Hama refers to those features that we may inherit from our parents. So, there was this understanding that somehow characteristics can be carried on in the young. And but this is a very specific kind of soul, and it dissolves upon death, and it returns to the earth. So it's very much
this is the soul that is part of us for
but
each
that is your body.
Our individual lifetime.
Right. So the idea, the understanding is that your body has its own kind of soul,
right.
Its own kind of, and this is very similar to the notion of the neshama in Hebrew or in Judaism, where your body actually has its own kind of awareness, its own kind of modus operandi. It has its own opinions. You know what I mean? And you'll inherit some of those characteristics from your parents, and possibly from other places. But when you die, it returns to Aortha, who, by the way, is the name of Aortha. Earth is the goddess. It's the mother. That's the term. Earth means mother. Aortha. That is actually the main mom, and that's an Anglo-Saxon. And then there is the aspect of the soul that connects the physical, the Hama, to all these spiritual aspects that we've been talking about. And this is called the alder. And it also dissipates when the body dies. So there are two aspects of soul that are connected very specifically to your physical self. And I call them the sort of plumbing that you need to get through the world, and as they are composed of the earth, so they will return to the earth, and that's their proper location.
It's like literally like the spiritual biology of the body. It's
pretty much, yeah. Now, the most important life soul is that determines your focus and your purpose. And this is where we get the term soul from, is Saiwelo. That's its Norse name, Saiwelo. And it's the focus or purpose of a person's life. And this is actually, Saiwelo always inhabits you, but it always inhabits hell. It's part of, in other words, it's never completely just in you, because it's part of your purpose. It's part of your will. And it's that which will enable you to actually act in the world. It's part of your willpower. It isn't just your life force. It's part of what gives you the motivation to go forward. It's what is most connected to
my God.
Okay.
So let me just point you. So let's go back to that story where I was getting that reading from that man.
Mm-hmm.
So this reading, if I don't even know how to explain it. He explained it to me, but I was so in like that I really wasn't. I couldn't. But it's this layout that basically reads the entire soul of the person, and it's a very complicated layout. And in the area that I had the most deficiency, or the area that needed assistance, was just that, the place of the willpower, the place of the suelo, although he called it something different.
Right.
And so the fact that you're saying that is absolutely blowing my mind, because you're saying it's connected to hell, that piece of the living souls, the life souls.
Right. I mean, this is what gives you your purpose, your will, your desire to do, your desire to act in the world. Wow. It's also that which accumulates what is called I know I'm not going to pronounce it right, Orlog, which is the layers of existence. That's what Orlog means. It means layers of existence. It's kind of like the Norse version of karma. The idea is that it's like strata. You layer up things that then will act as, this is how I read it. When we think of layers, we think of like geological layers. This is kind of how I think of it. When you are spinning yarn, spinning wool, and anybody who has spun wool knows this, especially if you've decided to dye that wool first before you spin it. What you'll notice as you spin it is that inside you're actually creating little layers of color, because the wool is not uniformly dyed in such instances. And even if you're using natural wool, you'll notice that, as it pulls out, there'll be all these little layers of color in there. And then when you actually weave, but what you're doing is you're creating thread that can then be woven into something. And that's kind of what the Orlog layers are to me. They're not like geological layers. They're like a thread that's wool that's being spun, and then it can finally be woven into a pattern. And once when you weave something, in order to see the pattern, you have to see it two ways. You see the pattern on top, which is your tapestry, but then there's this pattern underneath, which is holding that all together. And that's what the Orlog really is. It's those knots and that weaving and those patterns underneath and that when you turn it over, it is the pattern of your life.
Oh my goodness.
And the reason why I think of it this way is because the Norns are obviously involved in this. And Hela her name linguistically is connected to other goddess figures like Farah, Perkana and Berkta and Frau Hela. And all of these are like the old goddesses, like the old grunt goddesses,
OGs.
The original goddesses of the Northern European people, and they are all concerned with weaving. They are all concerned with weaving as kind of the metaphor for how you are constructing your life. And so hell is the place where where the threads are unraveled, just like the souls are unraveled, your souls are unraveled so that you can recreate something again.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. So those are like the life souls. Now there are 3 what are called wandering souls, and what's meant by these, the reason why they're considered wandering is because while they are used to describe certain qualities that people have, and are understood to be kind of living souls in that way, they are also things that can be learned, that can be transferred between people, or that people can lose. And so they seem to be connected to other entities or other beings from time to time. And so one of these is Huger, which is mind. It literally means mind. It's the conscious personality. This is the conscious personality that can gather information and decide, make rational thought, healthy boundaries, and the fact is that Huger can come and go. It can be in your head, or it can go away. And this was recognized then. And Huger is one of those characteristics that it's thought might transfer to other humans, or be reincarnated in certain ways, or be combined with other types of minds to create new kinds of beings, actually. So we have this sort of conscious ego. What's interesting about the implication here is that there is this implication that human beings have this capacity. It isn't unique to just us, but humans concentrate on themselves, but they seem to have this capacity to create new types of life, in the same manner that even now we're talking about artificial intelligence and stuff, but that the conscious mind, that Hugger, at some point it might be able to break, like at death, break off on its own and create a whole new form of whatever.
Wow.
And then there's another type of wandering soul that's called Mod. And it's think of it as kind of the immune system. It's that which is associated with maintaining the strength and integrity of the body. So it's connected to strength and will, so it connects to Sewelo, but it also sort of has its own manifestation. And when, for example, a healer is working on a patient, what they will often try to do is strengthen the mode, transferring some of their mode to the patient in various ways. So it's understood to be a characteristic of the body that, or the soul, that can leave or not, and it seems to be very, very mobile. Sometimes it doesn't even completely leave the body at the time of death, and then might be responsible for hauntings.
Wow.
In which case it will join with the ghost, with the envelope, and might be responsible for those kinds of manifestations.
That is crazy. This could actually go imprint into an active poltergeist. This feels, because it seems like it gives it will, it gives it that strength to be able to move things and interact in the environment, versus just being an imprint that's like kind of like a memory. That's crazy.
And then the final wandering soul is Seha, which is the ability to sense, perceive, empathize, and understand. It is the source of compassion in a person, and it allows allows individuals to connect to community and our ability to reach beyond ourselves. And the reason why it's considered to be a separate soul is because a person can develop it. And some people seem to be just born with it, and others seem not to be.
You ain't kidding.
And so there was this recognition that it wasn't in everyone. So, but it can sometimes be bestowed. It's one of those things that it seems to be a quality in some people, but not in others. What's important about this, and there's one other characteristic that some human beings have. It's not a soul. Nobody knows where this comes from. It's believed to possibly be connected to one's orlog, those layers, but we don't really know. It's called Haminya, and this is an energy of fortune or luck or power, the ability to get things done, a certain power of manifestation that can be shared or bestowed to others. And so some people just have that Haminya, and it has nothing to do with morality. Okay. Like Elon Musk has Haminya.
Right. Yeah, that motherfucker is definitely not moral.
Yeah. But Haminya can also run out if you abuse it. So the important thing to do, it's like an energy. It's like a good luck energy. So it's like the best way, and if you read the Havamal is really clear about it. The best way to keep your Haminya up is to share it with people. Share your abundance in a good way with people, and that will keep your Haminya up. So those are the different levels of soul, the different types of soul.
Which is necessary to know when talking about hell, because, and here's where my question comes in. She doesn't receive everyone upon death, right? So we understand that there are different levels of the afterlife and different spheres of the afterlife that are kind of governed by various different gods. And some of these spheres are considered more noble and better, if you will, than others.
They're just for warriors. I mean,
Yeah, and so I'm wondering, so since hers is not really a warrior sphere, and these different types of soul don't necessarily, these different types of souls that you're discussing here don't necessarily discuss whether or not you are a warrior or this type or that
no,
type of
no,
soul.
it
But
has nothing to do with that.
right, so of these categories, maybe that's not the question. What type of people does she end up getting?
She
And
gets
of those
she
people,
gets
what do
everybody.
these kind of souls have to do with it?
She gets everybody that Freya and Odin don't pick. So she gets most of us. I mean, and you have to keep in mind that, at least according to the stories. I mean, I'll put it this way: at least according to the stories. I mean, I have my own opinion about like where Valhalla and Folkvanger came from. You know, I think that Volkanger probably existed first. That's where Freya is from, and she gets first pick essentially of the warriors, and then people that are left over, Odin gets. I mean, a lot of people don't know that, but Freya gets first pick, then Odin gets second pick, and these are people who've died. It's very Klingon. These are like people going to Stovelcore. They have to die in a warrior's death. You know, if you don't die a warrior's death, then you go to hell. And and that sounds awful, but keep in mind that hell is not a dark, horrible place necessarily. It's where everybody goes. It's where everybody goes to sort of get sorted out, you know. And so that's why you have to look at like, well, who, you know, well, this is the mother who receives everyone.
Right.
You know, this is the mother. This is the mother who does not discriminate. You know, between one person and another. You know, she's not going to discriminate between. You know, I hate to put it this way because, you know, but it's true. She's not going to discriminate against a Nazi and somebody else.
Right.
You know, because they're all creating their own orlog, their own, you know, they're spinning their own stuff.
Right.
So, you know, whatever tapestry the Norns work on, you know, there's you know, there's a whole thing in Norse mythology about fate. You know, people talk about fate and that it's a very fatalistic tradition. It really isn't a lot, but it does acknowledge that people have made their beds. People have made decisions. They have made choices. And it's not that they can't make other choices. They can. They can change their minds. They can do something differently. But if you've made certain decisions that are beyond a kind of threshold, you're going to have to deal with those consequences. And there's nothing that can really change that. So for example, this is one of my favorite stories, and it deals with hell. One of my favorite stories is the story of Hervor. She discovers that her father and her brothers have all been berserkers. and they're all dead, and she realizes, and of course this is part of a blood feud, right? So they all died, and they're in their burial house, you know, their burial mounds, and their blood revenge, their family feud was not resolved. In other words, honor, you know, they died before they could regain the family honor. Just think Klingons. And so, because this is where they got this, actually, it's for Star Trek, is from stuff like, you know, the whole blood feud thing. And so basically, what there's this whole story about to the burial mounds, because what she wants to confront, she wants to find her father's sword and take up his quest and try to avenge her family's name. And and all the description, her father's name is Ungantir, by the way, and all the description of the burial house is very much as if hell had sort of opened up in front of her, and she sees all of the shades of her father and of her dead brothers, and one of the things that is characteristic of hell revealing itself in the stories to let you know that hell is sort of manifest is these wispy flames that are said to be around the burial mounds. They're probably, I would imagine, they're probably methane gas that's been lit or something, but whatever, in other words, there are these wispy kind of will-o'-the-wisp bluish flames. And in fact, if you want a really good kind of rendition, a Slavic rendition of this is a Northern European thing. In Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, there is a scene where the woman who Winona Ryder plays, I can't even remember, but whatever her name is, she has been bitten by Dracula, and she's being taken to his castle. Okay. And she's gradually turning into a vampire. So she's being taken to his castle. But before they get to the castle, there are these blue flames that are everywhere, that are warding the castle gates, and those have to be dispelled by a kind of spell that Dracula does, and then they die down, and then because they're entering the realm of the dead, so these flames are said to be sort of a sign that she's walking in the realm of the dead. So basically what happens is she demands the sword. Her father's shade shows up and it's like, don't do this. The sword has been cursed. Our family has been cursed. If you do this, you'll take on the curse yourself, and you may or may not win. And she doesn't care. So she takes it anyway.
Like, don't tell me what to do.
Well, what is it about the gates of hell that compel people to enter? Anyway, that's actually a line from Mystery Science Theater 3000. But anyway, but there's this whole description of her walking through among these burial mounds, and she's walking through hell, the upper levels, if you will, of hell, because that's where her family is. And so she gets the sword and she goes off and she becomes a Viking and a berserker, and that's where the story ends. It doesn't tell you what happens to her. Oh, so but it's so descriptive, because that's sort of how that's, and you'd think that they were warriors, that they would have been in with Odin, but they weren't.
Wow.
So something happened. Something happened there. Happened there. And that's crazy. But that's the stuff that's interesting. To me, the reason I wanted to tell you about all these souls is that there's this implication that all of us are hybrids in a way, where all of us are multiple types of consciousness that have come together into a single form here, and that some of these things like mind, for example, or whatever, they may not really belong to us entirely. We get very attached to certain aspects of who we are, but they may not have anything to do with us at all, in the sense that they'll go off and do their own thing or dissipate, or they don't necessarily have anything to do with our Sewelo, our life purpose. And so trying to find out what that life purpose is, even in Norse stuff, trying to find out what your life purpose is actually a really important thing. And so there are clues about how to do that, and trying to do that before one is called back, in a sense.
And so can she? So because your because that part of you, the suelo, is also in hell,
Mhm.
are you saying that she has a very important role in helping you to find out what your purpose is and what your destiny
I
is?
would imagine, yeah.
You know, like in the sense of possibly, you know, implanting certain thoughts or maybe helping guide you in this particular situation. Like, I don't know, because again, there's not so much written about her, so I'm hoping that we can speak on it in terms of at least some personal experiences if we can, or
Right.
things
Well,
like that. But you know,
I
does
mean,
she
what
interact
is
on a
she? Well,
yeah,
when do you meet her? I mean,
huh?
she's you meet her at death.
You meet her at death, but then
So you think
again,
about death,
you've seen that she showed up in divinations.
right?
You've
Exactly.
seen that she's able to give messages to help
Mhm.
us sort of get onto the path of our destiny and journey. So I'm so I, I find this so interesting because in the poem, not the poem, the quote that you had read
Mhm.
earlier in the live, where you know where she said that where she's sad that you know we're
I'm
kind of
having
just walking
words.
around in this darkness and we're you know we're fucking each other up and shit, and like there's this sadness there, so it really indicates a caring, you know, she's not an absentee hell figure, she's not an underworld goddess that just kind of stays there and just waits for you to arrive. It seems that she is very much involved in
Right.
life.
Well, and also the implication there is that the descendants of the northern peoples have forgotten her.
Mm.
And if they have forgotten her, then they have forgotten their own souls. They have forgotten their own source. They have forgotten and they've forgotten their own place in the world. And I mean, I don't know about you. You're younger than I am, so maybe I don't know, but I know that you face this. I think that a proper and deep appreciation of death and the limits of life can teach you a lot about what your purpose needs to be.
I agree.
Because at that point, you realize that you don't have a lot of time. And to me, what this prophecy indicates that I read at the beginning is that none of us have a lot of time. There is not a lot of time, and time in the manner that we mean it. In the
And it's
sense
also not guaranteed
it's
the time that we do
well
have.
we don't it's yeah, I mean, well, that's never been guaranteed. I mean,
Right.
we're talking about a people, you know, this came out of a people that, you know, their infant mortality rate was over 50%. So it's like, you know, we're talking about people who understood how difficult life was, and so had to make the most of it at every time, at every turn. um, so you know, that's part of the reason why I really think you know, the way when I think about Europeans and I think about European history, what you find in European history is that you know, you have these great civilizations in the South, you know, in the Mediterranean, and you know, where life is, well, it's still hard, but it may be a little easier from time to time, a little easier to farm or whatever. But it's like you have these things constantly sort of happening to people in the North. You know, you have epidemics and you have invasions and you have, you know, all these different groups that come from the steppes of Eurasia, and you just have this constant sort of milling about, and then you have a very difficult environment that, you know, at the drop of a hat you could have a little ice age or whatever. You know, it's difficult, and there's not a lot of potable water, so you have to constantly be worrying about that. There's a lot of infectious diseases, and then you have, you know, stupid shit like Christianity, I'm sorry.
I
I'm
feel you.
sorry for all of you for whom Christianity of a certain type is important. I apologize, but it did not do a good job in Northern Europe,
Yeah.
and and a good job was, well, it was basically, you know, one group of Germanic people converting, and then, you know, forcibly converting everybody else is what it amounted to. And so you just have this sort of trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma. And so finally, you know, in the 14th century, you basically have people saying, fuck this shit. You know, we're not going to believe any of this anymore. We're just going to, spices. We want spices. You know what I mean? And they just had some good luck at a certain point. They just had some, you know, they bumped into the other 25% of the planet en masse, and they just had some good luck, and regarded it as proof that they were doing the right thing, because they were just as superstitious as everybody else. And so now we have the last 500 or 600 years.
Yeah.
And the fact is that, well, that's going to end. It's ending, because everything does. But in giving up where you came from, you forget.
Yeah.
You forget. And so, to me, that prophecy is just about remembering. And also part of that remembering is also realizing how similar all of these ancient concepts are to ancient concepts in other places.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
For example, in Arabic and in Hebrew, you have the idea of that a person is also composed of, you don't have just one soul. You've got all these different types of soul that are part of, and this actually is part of, the Egyptians had that. This is part of the linguistic heritage of the Afro-Asiatic language family. So you'd have this idea that who we are as human beings here comes from multiple places. It comes from the earth. It comes from the underworld. It comes from the stars. It comes from all these places that have all sort of focused together on this person that you are. And some people have more of one thing than another. Some people are more connected in other way, and that's part of what makes us human beings. What makes us human beings is not that we have like one perfect DNA. It's that we are an amalgam. We are hybrid already.
Right.
And so and that's what has given us our flexibility. It's what's given us our diversity. It's what has
helped us to survive ultimately.
It's helped it, even biologically, it's helped us to survive. And it only becomes a liability if you get too attached to one particular way of seeing,
or one particular soul aspect, or one particular layer.
It only gets becomes a problem if you just get too fixated about one or two particular things, and you decide that that's what it all is.
It's crazy that you bring this up too, and I want to get back to Hela in a second, but earlier today, I was speaking with a beloved group of friends, and this concept that we kind of like started talking about a little bit about what's going on in the world today, right? And last night I was having like a freaking existential crisis. I was like crying. My husband had to come in and like talk to me, and because I really just felt overwhelmed about what I was seeing, in the media and in social media. And I'm not the only one. I know this. I was definitely just doing an oh woe is me situation. But there was a point in the conversation where he says to me, remember, he's like, because we talked about all kinds of stuff, and why would we murder each other, and why would we do this, and what about this, and like asking all the questions. And we obviously we saw some of those common threads. Yes, we see greed. Yes, there's money involved. Yes, there's colonization involved. But there's also this sort of religious, deeply embedded concept of divine right to land, divine right to a people, divine right to being better off than others, because you were a chosen group or you were a special group. And the conversation then led us to, well, what if tomorrow we found out definitively, without a shadow of a doubt, we found out that what we've believed this whole time and who we believed in this whole time doesn't exist?
Mm-hmm.
Then how do you rationalize all of the murder? How do you rationalize all of the colonization? How do you rationalize if tomorrow you find out none of it existed? And that's the part of your soul self, and that's part of the destiny you clung on to the point where you could watch people be murdered and not even blind, and you find out today that it's gone. But then,
Mm-hmm.
and that I think that question is one of the things that is just as palatable and just as important as contemplating your death, contemplating your life, and time you have on the earth. I think it's all, like you were saying, sitting with different parts of yourself, and those parts understanding that they're temporal, understanding that they are not you completely. They are you at this time. They are you and they could go away. They are you and they could, you know what I mean? And like,
Right.
I think that is so hard for people. That is
It is.
so hard for
Well, it is because because and that comes down to identity.
yes.
We have, you have tribal identities, you have national identities, you have religious identities, ethnic identities. And these are all things that I mean, you've taken social sciences, you know this. These are all things around which we construct our sense of who a self is or what a self is. And but what mystical spiritual practice does is that it helps you to understand that whatever it is you think you are, you're actually not that, and
Exactly.
or you're not just that.
Right.
And who you really are, that suelo, that life's force, that purpose. That's actually the deepest mystery that you can investigate. And I mean, that's part of the reason why, I mean, you gave this bio at the beginning, and, I've studied all these different traditions, and that's part of the reason why, even though I know a lot about them, and I've actually engaged in them at depth, in the end, I had to gravitate towards a tradition that would help me to be beyond, to reach beyond those underneath, if you will, those all those different identities, all those different traditions. I mean, one of the things I didn't even mention in there, because it's so painful for me right now, is before I became a Sufi, I was a member of the Jewish community for a decade. I mean, I actually converted to Judaism, the whole 9 yards, the whole Orthodox conversion, and practiced that religiously, observantly for a long time. And I had to leave that community because of Zionism. And I will say that openly here, because and I know a lot about the history of Zionism. The Zionism that we see in Israel is not. There are several different types of Zionism. This is a very specific kind of Zionism. It is called divergent Zionism, and it is militaristic, and it was developed and adopted during the late 1930s and 1940s. In the wake of what was going on in Europe, and so it's not even what was originally envisioned as Zionism, by Theodor Herzl. So basically, I got told the ultimatum, that basically you had to agree with Zionism, or you were anti-Semitic, and I knew that was crazy. It was just, that was crazy, and so to me, when I see what's going on in this situation, is I see a deep and profound damaging of the soul, of the Jewish soul, and its manifestation in not in all Jewish people, obviously, but this is why Jewish people are divided about it. It's like, Israel purports to speak for all Jews, and it doesn't even speak for all Israelis. So, the Israeli government doesn't. The present Israeli government doesn't, because 20% of Israeli citizens are Palestinians, are Arabs. So obviously they're not going to be happy with what's going on. So it's like, just quit using Hashoah. That's the Hebrew for the Holocaust. Quit using Hashoah as emotional and spiritual blackmail.
Yep.
Stop it. Just stop it.
Yes.
And so it's very painful for me. So I didn't even put that in my bio, not because I want to ignore it, but because to me it's very much about souls. It's very much about, because, Judaism as a whole, kind of in the mystical tradition of it, does see the souls of Jews as being that's a level of soul. There's like a collective, if you will, a collective soul that all Jews share. And to me, it's like, you guys, and I'm gratified that, the Jewish soul has a lot of, let's talk about trauma. I mean, this wouldn't be going on without that trauma.
Without the trauma, right.
Without the trauma. So it's very, very difficult. And then, of course, the Palestinian people are a different. They're actually not one people. They are a number of different ethnic groups.
Yes.
That lived in the area that was called Palestine, but have been joined in a particular identity because of the establishment of the state of Israel. And now they have, the identity of being a Palestinian now is a very specific kind of thing. And what people, not all Palestinians are Arabs. That's why you'll hear Palestinians talk about Palestinians and Arabs, because they're not all Arabs. They're ethnically very diverse. And a lot of them are Christians. Yeah. So it's not even that they're all Muslim, and they're actually other things too. Some of them are Druze. So, there are lots of different groups.
But again, you're talking about identity here. And this identity in this particular, example of what's happening in the world right now, we are seeing people not only clinging to identities that are causing a lot of issues, but we're also seeing identities being imposed upon people that now we're going to have several generations being born and growing up with this idea of who they think a Palestine is now, who they have to identify as now, because they went through this thing.
Well, exactly.
That trauma bonded them.
Right.
And which happened to the Jews before. And so it's, again, this cycle of trauma bonding to an identity that you yourself never even wanted on you. It was something that was imposed due to this. And so I find that to be interesting. And so if we were to bring this back to Hel and to Hela, when you were talking earlier, about her, one of the things that popped into my mind, because I remember, after I had that reading with that man, I went home and meditated on it. And a few of the things that had come up in that meditation was this idea of surrendering to that void, surrendering to that mystery, surrendering to the not knowing, and being comfortable and safe in the not knowing, because it is the only truth we know. Whereas everything else is flexible, it's expandable, it'll change with the winds, it'll change with the current sciences, it'll change with the current governments, it'll change. Whereas the truth of death, the truth of hell, the truth of mystery, the truth of that will always be consistent. And so this idea of when you leave this earth and you go into hell, to then be unraveled, to understand yourself, to understand your role within the larger wool string of community, and then to reweave yourself again, with the help of Hel, I think that's such a beautiful story to kind of incorporate into your life. Because when you're looking at today's day and age, you're looking at people's all over the world, we're not just now, let's not even talk about Israel and Palestine anymore, but just people
No.
all over the world
Well,
going through
Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine, Russia,
everywhere, Russia, Congo, everywhere.
Congo, yeah.
We're looking at worldwide spiritual identity crises because they have forgotten what this central core is, which is, bitch, we're all gonna die. That's the only bitch you need to know about is death. Okay. And the thing is that she's not this scary figure. This she's actually, and from what I'm sensing, especially from that meditation, was that it was a very loving figure. It was a very motherly figure. It was, I what I got from it was, give your pains to me. Give the parts of yourself that you are clinging on to that is causing so much damage. Give that to me.
Right.
Allow me to transmute it. Allow me to do something with it to then offer it back to you as something more useful for this time and for your journey and for your path. And that's what I was being told constantly. And this was before our conversation. This was before, our little conversation on Facebook. And so to hear you speaking about all of this in the way that you're speaking about it is so confirming to me. And I hope it's confirming to a lot of other people who may have been, exploring the idea of maybe working with a spirit of death or researching a spirit of death, because we have a lot of Santa Muerte devotees in our life. We have a lot of people who, deal with, Hades, and a lot of these other spirits of the underworld. And there's something to be said about a lot of these personalities, although they're not all the same. Let's not get it twisted. There is this sense of motherliness or fatherness or pareness, a parenting, if you, over the realm, over the souls in which habits that realm. And I stretch when I say that.
Yeah, and if you remember, when we had our Facebook conversation, I gave you a rune reading. Do you remember that? I said I would do a rune working for you. And this is the other part of this, which I do think is important, because one of the interesting things in the Norse mythology is that when Ragnarok occurs, all of Loki's children manifest themselves. So, the wolf of greed, Fenrir, is unleashed upon the world and devours Odin, whose name means ecstatic wisdom and inspiration. And the giant Surt comes and burns the world, and the world gets very hot, and then has to be transformed, then goes through a period of 3 years of winter called the Fimbul Winter. But what's interesting is that all of the one person you don't hear of in that story is you don't hear about hell, what happens with hell. But but when the world is reborn, what you find is that Balder, who has resided in hell, is reborn into the new world, into the new refreshed world. So somehow something has happened in hell. Something has, there's the story in certain parts of Christianity, certain types of Christianity, but also you also find it in certain types of Buddhism in Japan, Japanese Buddhism in particular, where, at the end of the ages, the gates of the dead will be opened and all the dead will come out, which I think, the whole zombie thing that we're obsessed with is sort of a reflection of that. But what that, I've thought a lot about that, because one of the things that came up in the reading that I gave to you, and this is actually this was what I thought. This is the first thing that came to my mind when I first heard about the Hamas attack on October 7th, which, by the way, and this is, they may have done this on purpose, I don't know, but coincidentally or not, that was on the festival of Simchat Torah. And Simchat Torah is the festival in the Jewish liturgical calendar that it's the end of all the harvest festivities and the New Year festivities of the month of Tishri, but it's also the end of Sukkot, which is the harvest and ancestor festival. And liturgically, it also is there's like a ceremony, a ritual where you finish reading the liturgical, you finish reading the Torah liturgically, and then you begin it again. So you read the last bit of Deuteronomy, and you read the first part of Genesis.
Wow.
So it's like this. So basically, the Torah is beginning and ending and beginning again.
On
So
that
it's
day.
on that day. So that was like when the attack occurred, was on that day. And when I first heard about it, the first thought that came to my mind, this is literally the first thought. I had two thoughts. The first thought that came to my mind was, they've kicked the door open.
Mm.
And what I meant by that was this, and it was confirmed by the reading that I gave you, that this is the beginning of Ragnarok. If we think about the end as being, we think of Armageddon, the end of days, as being, the single event, but it's actually kind of this, what the Norse mythology indicates is it's a stretched out event. There are several phases to it. There are several things that happen, and it happens over a period of time. It happens in pulses. And the second thing I thought was, this is not going to end well. I mean, that was like, those were the first two thoughts that happened in my head. And we all know that there are repercussions of this way beyond the region, way beyond our souls, way beyond anything. But something has happened. What the reading indicated to me is something has happened with this, because it's not just this, but with this, that is going to have ripple effects, that is going to basically, open the gates of hell up.
Right.
And I don't mean that in a bad way. We're not going to have zombies. It's not like that. It's like, in other words, think of it in terms of, this is when your Sewelo might finally manifest itself.
Your destiny might finally
might finally manifest itself.
Right. And I'm noticing too, this is another thing I'm noticing too. And I'm not going to speak just for Hel and Hela, but this idea of a deity of the underworld, or a god or a goddess of the underworld, I'm noticing a much larger uptick in individuals being either curious to go meet them and work with them, or being reached out by them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if, if, like you say, if October 7th is any indication of these stories and of these myths potentially playing itself out, would it make sense then for Hela to be reaching out to people to help put them on their right path, to assist in this process in any type of way? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, that could certainly be part of it. The other part of it is that there's a shit buttload of people entering.
A buttload of people entering. Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha.
And not just from that. If you think about it, in the last several years, there's been tremendously large earthquakes. There's been, there were two earthquakes in Afghanistan, during the same time period when all this started. We didn't think much about it because we were thinking about what was going on, in Palestine. But there's just a shit buttload of people that are entering. And it hasn't just to do with a lot of people dying. It has to do with the intentions behind the deaths. It has to do with the types of deaths. It has to do with the trauma that is connected to these deaths.
Because these aren't warriors' deaths. These are civilians we're talking about. So they're not warriors' deaths.
Right.
They're Hela's children.
Right. And most of us are Hela's children.
Yeah.
Most of us are. So, it's a little bit of all of that. It's like, what layers of orlog are you weaving right now? What kind of thread are you spinning?
Right.
What kind of tapestry are you going to weave? or you're going to help be woven because you don't weave it yourself, obviously,
Right.
I mean, that's the thing about these souls is that these souls, if you're these souls having being a hybrid like that, that implies that whoever you think you are, that you don't really completely belong to you. You are part of a series of processes
A very
in
complicated web.
in a very complicated way that are woven together. And while what you choose is important, and what your goal and motivation is important, your intention sometimes it can be everything. You also
It's the
you also
impact.
you also don't have the final say
Right.
about certain things. And so it's humility is important. um, Being open is important. I mean, I think that Hela coming to you at this particular time in your life, um, and is important in a number of different ways, because all women, at least in this tradition, all women are basically the vessels of this in one form or another, in one way or another. The oldest strata of the Northern European tradition recognized that, that women were basically, they were the bearers of this mystery, and men shared in the mystery, but they were not the bearers of it.
Mm.
So, all of that is part of Hela's process, I think.
I think that, yeah, that's that's wild because I was having another conversation with a friend about this and this idea of reincarnation, right? And I ended up writing a post in my little private Facebook group about how, when you really think about it, when you really think about it, we're not being reborn. We
Right,
are being recycled, if you will. And in that sense, it's almost as if you are born just once. You are
right,
born
right,
once, and then you die and get recycled over and over and over again. The death is what happens over and over and over again, not birth. And I find that to be like interesting in a very like esoteric way, because women, by their nature, by their physical nature, are the vessels of death, but we are oftentimes looked at as just birthers, as this idea of just birthers. But when you really think about what birth is, I mean, we talk about this in philosophy classes, we've talked about this in women's rights classes. I've talked about this all over the place, and one of the common threads you'll see is this idea that um, we we house death in order to give life. We die in order to give life, because there is that the ritual of birth is a disgusting, bloody process that could potentially kill the woman and the child. Um, Ultimately, it sacrifices the woman's body to the woman's everything. And so there's a sense of there is this sense of like death, her physically. You get that next than being a mother, and a lot of women suffer from identity crises, identity death, because you go from being this like person who do these things and so active and she was so creative and she this, to just be boom mother, as if she has to give up all of the part of herself. It can be a very traumatizing for a lot of people. So in a sense, I'm looking at this whole situation with Hela, and it's actually really empowering because she can kind of be all of it. When you look at her story, she's a little bit of everything, and
well,
that
she's
you
a
kind of
mother's.
embody that when you give birth, or when you bring forth her children into life, right? Into this
Well,
realm.
obviously, I mean that's why I think it's useful to think about her as kind of the personification of the secret dark place,
Yeah.
because you know being physical beings, we exist in that nexus. We exist in between life, in between birth and death, and that's the reality. I mean, I think that I mentioned to you before we got started on this conversation that I believe that all of our, the lives that we experience as past lives, past, present, and future lives, that all of those lives are lived at once, that basically it's all happening at once. Right. And so what we experience as, say, a past life is we're experiencing kind of a parallel existence, but that person isn't exactly us. And that in an interesting way, when you connect with a person in the past that way, you can influence each other. So that it's not like you have to burn off their karma, in a way. You can actually sort of work with that individual in that other place, and they're connected to you, but they're not you. And I mean, and the metaphysical structure that I use is actually derived from the Seth material. That's the best explanation I found. And that, what we think of as past, present, or future lives, and there are actually other present yous or counterparts to you that are actually exist in the same present as you. And occasionally you might run into them or not, that basically what makes us all connected is that we all come from one place. We all come from like one oversoul or one source, or if you want to put it, one Suelo, one master soul, Suelo. I'll just say Suelo. Just tack to it, because is a good Germanic term, which means primary.
There it is. It's juicy.
Suelo, right? And so that the reason why you're connecting to this life or that life or whatever is because you all share this primary point of origin. And so that's what's going to connect you. In the Seth material, he says, you could, if you guys weren't so entrenched in time and obsessed with linear time, which is an effect of your ego focus, of your identity focus, you'd be able to see your future lives. But you're so focused here that it's very, very difficult for you to do that. So, I actually don't really, there's a part of me that doesn't really want to know that, but then going back to these layers. Okay. Another book which you might find interesting, because it does talk about hell and is referenced by Winifred Hodgerows, is The Well and the Tree.
The Well and the Tree.
The Time, World and Time in Early Germanic Culture. I have found this book to be extremely useful. It does talk about hell and does talk about the layers of the soul and that kind of thing. But it also talks about the way in which time was understood. You had these layers in the past, and then you had the present, but the future was not known. The future was something that you created, that your Suelo sort of projected itself towards. Oh, by the way, there is an aspect of Suelo you need to know about. Suelo can project itself. So that's what we are. That's what our soul purpose is it projects itself into the part of you, that's where when you feel like you're very attuned to stuff, we all feel like that sometimes. That's when we're feeling the force of Suelo projecting itself into us from this realm, this mysterious realm of hell. And in some cases, with some people, this projection can be very powerful, and it can wander off on its own and do things by itself. And it's called, and when it does that, it's called Dwemer. And that's when a person, their projection, I guess we would call it astral projection, but that's when a person their will is so powerful, their purpose is so powerful that it actually seems to have its own force and can influence other people and influence events.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you can almost say so. Like, let's use, as a very fucked up, thing. But like, for example, Hitler and the Nazi movement. Like, this is a man with a very big suelo, a very big purpose that he made for himself, and he believed it so much, and it radiated out of him so much, and he projected it so well that he was able to convince millions of people to do his bidding and create the actual destiny he wanted from the beginning. He wanted to project out. Well, and that's pretty powerful.
Well, and the lesson of people like that to us is that's possible.
That's possible.
That's possible.
You just can't take it there.
No, because ultimately that's destructive.
Right.
And it's limiting. It's limiting. It's in the same way that, Israel thinks that it's protecting itself, but no, it's creating more people that will try to attack it. It's that it's because it's controlled by ego, a certain type of ego, and fear is at the base of it. Fear and insecurity is at the base of it. But so what you're doing is you're projecting out, and you're actually getting people out here to send you their power. You're eating their power, but you're telling them that you're going to do this for them, but they're actually working for you, and they're feeding that person. But what that should tell you is that power is available. The power is available for any purpose. It's available for good. It's just that for some reason, these folks have figured out a way to vampirize whole crowds of people, millions of people, whole nations, to be able to do this. In Zoroastrianism, they are called Druj, masters of the lie. Masters of the lie.
Masters of the lie. Oh, I'm quoting that.
And it's a use of power, and so, if people say, oh, but we can't do it, it's like, no, these guys are doing it. So you've got to do, why do we listen? What is it about the gates of hell that compel people to enter? What is it about shitty stuff that makes people want to follow it? Well, it's because those people feel powerless. Yep. Those people feel scared. Those people feel traumatized. Hitler was able to take the victimization of Germans under the papacy and under Christianity, that trauma, and was able to project it successfully on a group of people who for some sole reason have taken, have had this as part of their background, and was able to project it onto a group of people that were completely actually powerless in their society, and say it was their fault, and we have people like Trump and other people saying, oh, it's the immigrants, it's these other people. We're gonna take all of our insecurities, all of our ego stuff, and we're gonna say it's their fault. And that's what an unbalanced ego does. What is ego here? Hold on, I've got it. The ego soul here. Just a minute. I've got it on my phone. So just a second. I've got it on my phone. It is.
And it's very, I mean, this is what we consider, actually Lavetta just said it, oh my goodness, crowd mentality, but also the cult movements. I mean, that's literally what cults are.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. It's that charismatic leader that manages to surround himself with
here's the thing.
People.
Right. Here's the thing. It's a misuse of a wandering soul. It's the misuse of Hugger or mind. That's the part of you that creates the ego, the personality. And that can be healthy or not. And part of the reason why, part of the reason why it's difficult to deal with is because it's not part of your life soul. It's part of a wandering soul. It's a wandering soul. It's something that can be transferred. It's something that can be developed. It's something that can be, like in Sufism, what we do is we don't deny the ego. We don't deny that part of the personality. What you do is you seek to transform it into something that is more useful than just simply getting your own way.
So when you talk about transforming, when you talk the transform of it, because again, messages that I kept getting from Elle was this idea of purification, transformation. Give her the thing, she'll transmute the thing. And it was a very, very profound message that just kept coming to us. And now, you're also saying that hell as a place is that's what it is. It's like an alchemical place where you go to be transferred. So is there an opportunity for us here in the living world, physical 3D world, that we can utilize that transformative purification type like energy that hell has in her sphere? Is there a way to do that here? And I mean,
obviously there is. It depends,
like without dying.
It depends on what it's going to it depends on what tradition that you're in. So, for example, we talk about the shaman's initiation and how a shaman will go into the underworld and he will feel himself or herself being torn to pieces. How a devastating experience that is. And it's only devastating because it's the ego that's being torn up. It's not, your sense of self, your sense of who you are, that kind of thing. So each tradition has its own version of that in one way or another. I mean, in Sufism, there are a variety of practices that, and some of them are actually taken from shamanic traditions. There are a variety of practices that are intended to refine the heart, as they put it, and also to experience different levels of what's called fana, or annihilation. And annihilation, and there are different levels of it, different types of it, but it refers to the tearing away of the veils. I mean, these are the metaphors that are used. Tearing away of the veils that are used to cover the purity of the heart. And and there are practices that I have. There's a 7 levels of heart practice, a 7 levels of forgiveness practice. I mean, what I'm charged with, and this is my synchronicity with all of this. Okay, I told you that this Hamas attack occurred on Simchat Torah. Yeah. Well, on Simchat Torah, 25 years ago, I was initiated into Sufism.
Oh my God.
And there's a whole story there about, and I didn't really, it didn't occur to me at first. I had to have a series of experiences before I realized what was really going on. So let me just tell you the story of that initiation. I was still in the Jewish community at that time, although I was having some difficulty with it just because of what we've talked about. But I had planned to go to a Simchat Torah celebration, and I had accidentally, without thinking about it, had double booked that. I was going to go to that, but then I had been Sufi dancing just because I had had a vision, and this is a whole other thing. I'd had a vision of Hazrat Inayat Khan before I even knew who he was.
Oh,
And that's a
wow.
whole other story and the reason I say that is because I didn't know that the Sufi dancing I was doing was even associated with him. My brain had not like made those connections because of other things that were going on in my life. But anyway, I had been Sufi dancing. I had met my Sufi teacher. I didn't know she was my Sufi teacher, but she had said that the leader of the order was coming to Kansas City. This is when I was in Kansas City, and that he was going to be doing darshan, or, kind of a meditative practice. The term darshan actually comes from Hinduism and Buddhism, but many Sufis do it as well, a version of it. And did anybody want to go? And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. In the same way that, you just like, oh, that sounds like a cool thing to do. So, but when the day came up to it, I was really hesitant about it because I realized that I double booked with this ceremony. And I wouldn't decide, and I wouldn't decide, and I wouldn't decide, and I wouldn't decide all the way up to the point where I was actually late for. And I get this phone call, and keep in mind, this is before we have cell phones. I get this phone call from the woman who is my Sufi teacher now. And she, in a way that only she can accomplish, she has this ability to explain to you that you have violated adab, which is courtesy. You have violated adab. She has this way of explaining this to you in a way that is so gentle and tender, and yet utterly shames you.
Those are the best teachers. Those are the best ones.
Well, I was like, okay. So I go there, and I do darshan with him, and he starts telling me, I've never met this man. I don't know him from Adam. I didn't know he was the head of the order. I mean, I had no idea who he was. And he starts telling me the story of my soul.
Oh my God.
And it was a story that encompassed all the things that are important in my life, about how my soul is not actually from the earth. It's from a different place. And that I'm part of a group of souls that were caught here because of other things. And so it connected with all of my extraterrestrial stuff and all the stuff. And he didn't know me. And he was telling me about my life. But what he said was, what you have to remember is that the conflicts on this earth are not your conflicts. You have been caught here because of other things. So your most important thing in this life is to learn how to love and to forgive. And those are the only things you need to concentrate on. Everything else is just not your path.
Right.
Okay. So then at the end of that, he said, okay, that was an initiation. Now you need to go get a regular one so you can do something with it. That's literally what he said.
Oh my God.
So I became a Sufi. And so, but then what happened on October 7th was that it just so happened, because I do a series of meditations. These are just independent meditations that I do that are part of a series of seasonal meditations that Caitlin Matthews, I don't know if you know who Caitlin Matthews is, Caitlin and John Matthews, they have done Celtic shamanic work in the UK for years. And I finally got to meet Caitlin it was in the fall of 2019, before the pandemic. Beautiful, wonderful woman, amazing human being. But I've always enjoyed her. She has a series of seasonal meditations that are based on the Arthurian tarot. And I don't care about King Arthur really that much. She just has the ability to really do really incredible layered meditations that connect to the seasons that I've always found very useful. And so I've always just used her stuff because of that, because she has the ability to connect with all kinds of traditions and things. So anyway, it was time for me to, I was just doing the autumn, getting ready to do, the Samhain meditations, for winter. And this October 7th thing happened, and then all this crap started happening, and people are getting the shit bombed out of themselves. And it's just, the social media, this. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. The propaganda is off the wall,
Crazy.
and of course, I'm being torn up because I know Israelis. I'm getting internal messages from them. I mean, like private messages. I don't know any Palestinians, but I know people from Lebanon. I know people in Egypt. So I'm getting all of this information from all of these places. But it's time for me to do my Taliesin meditation. If you don't know, if you know who Taliesin is, he's in the Welsh Arthurian tradition. He's kind of like a bard and a high priest. He's just sort of a figure holder for those kinds of archetypes, So I was like, okay, I'll do my Taliesin meditation. So I did my meditation, and I went to it. I do them before I go to sleep so that I can direct my dreams. And so I had a dream, and that teacher who first initiated me, Moinadine, showed up as Taliesin. And he reminded me, he said, this is not your fight. This is not your fight. You have to remember forgiveness, and love, and that's all you do. Regardless of whatever else you're doing, that's all you do. And actually, it's really hard to do that.
It's so freaking hard. Yeah.
It's really hard to do that, because not only because I obviously have ego opinions about things, but because other people are pulling at you constantly, wanting you to be on this side or this side or this side or this side or this side. And it's like, my soul, my Soelo, it's like, you guys need to figure this out. I mean, it's not that I don't care. It has implications for the whole rest of the world. But, folks, I'm also not from here. So I have to live the rules of this world to be released from it. But you know what? Aortha is a great goddess, and I love her and all, and everything, but she's not where I'm from. And so that's sort of where I've had to go with this for me.
That's tough. That must be so hard, because
it's very
being yeah, especially when you're an empathic person, especially when you care about, the people around you and stuff like that. It's tough. And then on top of that, to have that destiny, or to have that piece of yourself that to be true, that's also hard for others to understand. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
To have,
because they think you don't care.
That you don't care, or what a privilege it must be to disassociate from the world and say that you're not from here, and really get a lot of that backlash from the people who are in the trenches. And it's not so much, and I totally get you, and it's not so much that you don't care, and it's not so much that you're saying it's not my fight, I'm not going to get involved. It's more that everyone has a role to play.
Exactly.
And in this particular lifetime, at this particular time in life, that is not your role. And you just so happen to be lucky enough to know that ahead of time. A lot of people don't have that luxury of getting their life read for them, or having their purpose or destiny read for them.
Exactly.
And so they end up getting so caught up in the crazy, and it's insane. I get you. I feel you.
Well, and as part of that, it's like, to me, it's not, I'm not separated from it. I feel physically ill every day because, because of everything. It's been, so it manifests in me in certain ways. But if you have privilege, and if you're an American, you have privilege of some type, relative. We have relative privileges, but, and certainly, right now we all have privilege compared to some people in the world,
Yeah.
then it's important that we find what our purpose is and use that to the best of our ability. And that's, to me, what hell would be.
Yeah.
Hell would be the opportunity for you to find what your soul purpose is if you have not located it yet.
Yes.
Because
And
and
these rituals, these ceremonies of purification and of annihilation,
Mhm.
of
Right.
symbolic death and all that, these are some avenues in which you can commune with hell and allow those
Mhm.
inspirations and those messages to come through.
Right, exactly. Because and like I said, every tradition is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
Every tradition has its way of approaching um, its way of approaching death. Whether
Mm.
it's through memory or through song or through ancestor altars or whatever. I mean, for me, it was always difficult because I have my biological ancestors. I have, but and I am connected to them in certain specific ways. But I also have a lot of other, ancestors, whatever that means,
Right.
and I also have lineages that I'm connected to. So,
Right.
like I have a Sufi lineage it's called the Silsila that I'm connected to. I have, through my my Vajrayana empowerments, I'm connected to certain lineages in Tibetan Buddhism. And those lineages sort of act as ancestral sort of stepping points for people that may not, know or connect so much to their biological or earth-based ancestors. So in my experience, any of that works,
Okay.
because it's all about understanding that who you think you are, who your ego thinks you are, is not who you really are.
Right.
um,
Right.
and and that you belong to something that is larger and deeper and older than you can possibly imagine.
Yeah. And especially when it comes to, kind of putting things in perspective for today and what's happening in the world out there. I oftentimes have to remind people, because I get asked so many times, hey, how do I work with the dead? How do I work with the muertos? How do I work with the dead? I want to work with the dead. I'm like, just look around. Look around. You're walking amongst the dead. We are all dead here. We're all dead here, but we're living a life. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's the part we tend to kind of like miss. It's like, look around. We are the dead walking amongst each other. How do you want to work with us? How do you want to work with us? And I think there you go with the weaving of the tapestry and the weaving of your
Mhm.
story and what role you want to play and what destiny, you know what I mean? Because it's there, it's laid out for you. And I think this idea of hell and this concept of mother death, it's true. It's like the divine mother, the source of where we all kind of stem from. Being her children and all. It's this idea that yeah, we are deaf. We are dead. But like and I hate saying the word because again, just like hell, the word dead is loaded. It's a loaded word. When you think
Well,
dead,
right. Well, because
you think of all kinds of shit. But
well,
that's
think of
not what
it.
I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, think of it. I mean, think of it as, you know, um, think of it as instead of just saying. I mean, there is a passing. I mean, on another level, death. There is no death. There is just a change of worlds. And
Yes.
and I think that understanding that understanding that the dead are all around you, but then also the living are all around you at the same time. I mean, where I live, where where my house is, or not my house, the house where I live. It's not my house actually, but the house where I live is in an area that was a kind of a sheltered wintering place for the Muncie people who preceded white people here, and the name that they had for themselves. This is why I like telling you about the Farah soul, because the name that they had for themselves, that they called themselves, was Iliwi, and it means we who only take counsel with the heart of the forest. That's literally what it meant. And so there are times when I'll go out in the backyard and I will just sort of think about what the place where I live, what it must have been like when the Iliwi lived, wintered here. And I'll just sort of, kind of sink into the earth in my mind, and just, because the earth holds the memory, and the woods hold the memory. And because 400 years, 500 years is not that long ago.
But a lot of shit can happen in 400 years.
Right. Especially when you're a group of people who've been high powered by stimulants.
Yep.
Which, the sugar trade, let's go, tea. I mean, it's kind of like we were adolescents, and Europeans were adolescents, completely overstimulated, conquered the world. Anyway, and I will do that, and I will feel it. I will feel that feeling of what it was like for it to be, because the moon is the same moon, stars are the same stars, and they looked upon the same phases of things that, and what it does is it helps me to realize that past is still right here. It's still right next to me. It's still right next to me. And, I can't do anything about what's happened in between, except that I can bring that past to the present and hopefully take that energy and pass it on. That's part of what I do in my forgiveness stuff. The Sufis have a practice where you recite some of the names of God. It's called zikr. We are remembering the aspects of the divine. And because ultimately it's understood that these things will become part of you. You will become part of what the divine is.
Yeah,
and one
unification.
And one of these names is Wasia. And it represents the ability of the heart to contain all things, and the reference to it is in the Quran, and it basically says, God, through Gabriel is talking to Muhammad, and God says, the sun and the moon and the earth cannot contain me, and yet the heart of all my beloved ones can contain all that I am. And the idea there basically is that all the things that happen in this world, all of the pain and the anguish and the bullshit, the bullshit that happens, somehow my task, as my Suelo task, is to somehow contain all of that and just hold it. Just hold it so that it can be reframed, because if you can hold it, then that means it's part of something larger. And once it becomes part of something larger, there's room for change to happen. That's what forgiveness is.
Yes,
is
sir.
when you realize that it's not just this conflict in Palestine. It's not just this conflict in the Ukraine. It's not just this conflict in the moral and ethical heart of the Republican Party. It's not just, all this stuff is happening in all of us all the time. But if I can contain it just for a minute, then that means that it's all there. It's all there in hell, in a secret place, and it can be transformed. And
Oh,
that doesn't mean I transform it. You see, it's not my power of forgiveness, because I don't want to forgive these fucks. You know, you know, you know. Give me the tarot card that has this. You know, that's what I want to do. But but you know, the heart of the beloved can do this, can do what I can't do. So that's the sort of thing that I do. I mean, that's the kind of practice. I do it in the morning. You know, I'll go out, do it with my chickens. I'll do it with, I have chickens now, by the way. And I will do this, you know, in my morning meditations, go outside. Like tomorrow morning, I may go out, if it's clear, and do it with the full moon. So, you know, those are the kinds of things I do. And so everybody has got to kind of do their own stuff. I'm not saying that everybody has to forgive and everybody has to love. Some people are not in that place. Right. And you know, I am not going to go up to a Palestinian or an Israeli person who has lost somebody to violence and say, you need to forgive. That is just not my place to do that. Yeah. You know, I'm the one that can hold all of that. Yeah. And I have to be at a distance to do that. You know, you can't do that and be in a war zone very easily, because you're going to be running around trying to survive. So, you know, if you're at a distance, then this is a privilege that you have, and you need to use that.
Right. Oh my God. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And in essence too, so like you mentioned, to bring it back to Hela, you know, because we are all connected there, because our souls are still there as well as here. Because again, this here there thing is a very murky distinction. So because of that, we all have the capacity, we all have the capability of, you know, connecting that cord and allowing ourselves to be vessels or bridges of, you know, these harmful, toxic, fear-based energy, allowing it to flow through us to those spaces in hell for it to be transmuted and then to flow back. Right. And that's the potentiality that we have. We can potentially do that. I mean to ask you this, when we think of death, then our physical death. Now, granted, we have the mythologies that hell is a place, but now that we're speaking about it in a very philosophical way, and we're kind of bringing in different types of spiritualities and their perceptions of death, and kind of molding it together, I have to ask, because of her role and because of what we're seeing of her so far, is death, or is hell, this chain, is hell this place that we phase into, or is it the phase itself? Is it the change itself? Because it almost feels like she is a gateway to other spheres, versus a holding place for the dead.
I think she can probably, as a realm, it can probably be both.
Okay.
You know, because I mean, if you look in the mythology, that there are different, you know, and you think of hell as a location, there are different things going on there. You know, there are people. Some people are hanging out. You know, some people are doing what they can do. You know, it seems to be a place of activity, and I think that there's probably a lot of different things that can happen there. And it can probably also be a psychological state on a certain level too, you know, when you connect to it as a realm of transformation. And I think that it also can become, you know, I think that it's been personified because of its connection to the goddess, because of its connection to Aortha, you know, the earth itself, you know, the honkin' big goddess, as I call her, you know, and that's the way she operates. You know, she operates by, and she transmutes everybody. The woods will, you can walk in the woods, you can, the woods will accept, the actions of a murderer. I mean, there's sort of a neutrality there, which is part of the reason why I think, other than trying to hide their stuff, I think people who do bad things, they end up there because there is a kind of neutrality there. And that neutrality may not seem very just to us on the surface, but all kinds of things are happening there, and so that's where the shit gets worked out. So I think it's all of those things. It's the afterlife. It's the phasing into the afterlife. She is the gateway because, it's like the Grim Reaper. There is a gateway. There's a gatekeeper. We personify the gatekeeper. Whether it's Hela or Santa Muerte or whoever we see, whoever is there.
And so I would ask then, this would probably be more of your personal gnosis versus any information we could find out there. So then I would ask, where does the morality and the merit fit in, if there is any? Because if we go to this place to unravel, if we go to this place,
it's in your threads.
And so, but there's no. Is there any sense of justice or quote unquote punishment for bad doings and maybe a better part of hell for those doing good duties?
Not within hell itself. No,
gotcha.
Not within hell itself. But insofar as whatever your deeds are, they color the threads that are being spun. They color the threads that are being spun. And that is going to result, if we're going to follow this mythology, this symbolism, that it's going to create the circumstances that you find yourself in.
I love that you use the word color too, because now it sparked something else into me that I think is a perfect way to explain this. So your deeds, your life, your soul colors these threads, which then you go to hell to then unravel and kind of take a closer look at. But at the end of the day, those threads are still your fucking threads. And at the end of the day, you have to then reweave yourself into a new tapestry for this next life.
Actually, it's woven for you.
But like, you still got to use the same thread. So it's like whatever you imprinted, whatever color you put on there, that doesn't just fucking disappear, I'm assuming. So now you're going into this next life with these predetermined sort of things that are kind of within your threading, these layers,
these pre-stained things,
pre-stained fucking threads. Yeah. And so I think the goal is to kind of purify the thread, right? To get that thread just
over time to create new threads, new deeds, to create obviously.
I fucking love that, bro. Like, seriously, it's one of those things where, I got this reading from this guy. I'm being told, give me the things so that I can transform it for you. Don't worry about it. I got you. But meanwhile, I'm standing here like a fucking, with my head on a swivel going, but how? And now here you are literally explaining the souls in this particular pantheon, in this particular system of belief. And now that you've explained the souls and how it is connected to hell, I now have a bridge. I now have an understanding of what she is asking for and how I'm able to give it to her. Because up to this point, I was like, how do I give this to you? You're asking for this stuff, but it's like, okay, but how do I give this to you? I appreciate you so much.
I will tell you this. I mean, I haven't done this whole thing myself, but this may be useful for you. I'll see if I can get you a copy of it. It's a ritual that Winifred Hodge Rose put together that is based on Anglo-Saxon tradition and is based on working with the threads and working with the Norns and transforming your life. And it's
Mhm.
called The Threads of Weird and Shield, a Ninefold Rite of Life Renewal. And it's about letting go of Orlog,
Oh my god, yes,
and,
please. I
and so obviously it involves hell in here, but it's a ceremony. It's a kind of weaving knot ritual, which was very, very common in Northern Europe and very common in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East, by the way. Knot magic, weaving magic, that sort of thing. And it's very much about untying those knots that have so that you can undo your threads, essentially.
yes, I would absolutely love that. Thank you. Thank you so, so much. Now, I am
I've done a little of it. I mean, because you can do it in several parts. You can do it in several parts, and it does involve what's called kind of symbolic. One of the ways in which, look at this. Oh, solstice songs. I didn't realize I had those. Yule songs, just a whole pile of Yule songs right there. One of the things that you could do if you had a debt, and this, you can see this happening in some myths, but not so much to hell, because hell doesn't give a shit. But it could relieve debts, like Orlog that had accumulated that you wanted to purify in this life before you died. Okay.
yes.
And the most common way of doing that, it's called shield. And what shield is it's a debt. It's a debt that it can also mean guilt. In fact, the German word is Schuld, and it just simply means debt or guilt. An obligation that you may owe to somebody or to something. It doesn't have to be a person. Something that you've done. I mean, we all owe debts to our parents, for example. But if you have certain types of debts that have created situations in your life that you need to get rid of, that you need to change, then what you would do in Germanic culture, like if you had a debt to someone, you wronged someone, you could pay them what was called weirgold. It was a payment. In fact, in order to stave off blood feuds, one of the things you could do, if somebody killed your relative, and you didn't, and if you wanted to avenge their death, you had to do exactly the same to them. But instead, if you wanted to, you could exact from the authorities and force them to pay you weirgold. It's not that this weirgold or this will replace the person, but what it does is it relieves you of the obligation of having to endanger your own life by trying to perpetuate revenge. That's what the purpose for that is. People misunderstand that a lot. But the purpose of weirgold is to try to keep blood feuds from happening. That was really what its purpose was. And so she has a way, she has developed a ceremonial ritual way of assessing what your shield is, what your debt is, what your guilt is, what your obligations are, and then symbolically paying weirgold in one way or another. It's a heathen way of what an AA is called a fourth and fifth step. You basically look at the people that you've wronged and you make a list of them and you make amends to them in one way or another. So it's just a heathen way of doing that, a ceremonial way of doing that. And that was understood as one way in which you could begin the process of purifying or unraveling some of those knots that you got tangled in.
Yeah. Or that gets stained pretty bad.
Pretty bad, right? And you may not be able to do all of it, but you do what you can of it, and
Wow.
and so that's I mean, I have it printed out, so I'm going to have to find out like where to get it to send it to you. Maybe I can put it in a PDF.
I was gonna say, maybe if you give me the title, maybe I can try and find it as a
Well,
PDF. But
I think
is it part of a larger book?
I think no, it's not part of a book. It's part of. I think it's actually in an encrypted file. So what I will do is I will scan this. I will scan this and put it in a PDF and send it to you that way.
That's awesome.
You know,
thank you so much, Professor. Thank you.
Sure.
Now, speaking of which, we're approaching the 3-hour mark, and I know you mentioned
no, we're not, and we're two
and a half. 2.5.
2.5.
Well, I wanted to ask you, if what's the right way of saying this? It's not so much that I'm asking whether or not working with hell is an open practice, because I'm assuming that when you deal with the energy of death, regardless of what tradition you're coming from, you're dealing with death. I mean, it's going to be death. You have to just respect, the story around death in that particular tradition. So my question to you is, if someone wanted to work with hell, or wanted to connect with hell, or wanted to heal with hell, or wanted to find their life purpose with utilizing the help of hell, what would be some of the first steps, or what would be some advice you'd want to give them, even if it's not to work with them right away, but just some advice in terms of how to proceed, I think is the right word.
Well, I think that let me think, because you're not going to find a lot of written material about her. I mean, and I think part of the reason, I think that there's two reasons for that. I think one of the reasons is that you have to remember that all the written material that we have is late.
Real late.
It's late. It's real late. And so there's a real Christian kind of overlay to all of it. But I also think that on another level, the idea of the underworld and the ancestors and all that was so old, was so prevalent, that people didn't talk about it a whole lot. And so I think that probably one of the best ways in which to, if you want to approach it from a Germanic perspective, kind of get into, I guess you would say, the groove of the feeling, because I go by feeling tones. It's what I do. It's like I have a lot of intellectual stuff because I have a good brain, but when I actually am investigating a tradition, I feel my way into it. I find what its central core concern is, and just feel my way through my heart into the questions that it's trying to answer. And so it's not really an intellectual exercise. So I think probably one of the most interesting, if you're going to read, there's a collection of stories called The Turnip Princess.
The Turnip Princess?
The Turnip Princess. And The Turnip Princess is a collection of stories that the Grimm brothers collected but would not publish. And the reason that they would not publish them was because they were too pagan. They are folklore stories. They are from Germany and from Scandinavia. And they are so incredibly pagan. I mean, they're but they're all about Frau Hela. Frau Hela appears in them many times, and she is one of the stand-ins for hell. She is one of the personifications of hell, and she's in many of the stories. Her and other names, like another name is Perkta, another name is Burka. There are several names that she has, but these stories are just filled with bizarre plots and twists and they almost seem amoral in a certain kind of way, especially if you're Christian. They're going to seem very amoral, which is part of the reason why, the Grimm brothers didn't include them. But they're just full of symbols and rituals and little tidbits about this herb and little tidbits about this incantation, and just rich stuff. I found the book to be a revelation. I was like, it's like nobody reads this book, but this book is just full of
all the juiciness.
And it's all happening in the forest. It's happening in the mountains, with all of the beings, with all of the talking animals, with all of the, to me, it's the most amazing book. But it's called The Turnip Princess because that's what the name of one of the stories. But I would start with something like that rather than some kind of an intellectual tome, so that you can get kind of a feeling for the world that we're talking about, and then after that, if you can afford it, and you really want to talk about hell or get in touch with hell, I would get this book, this Heathen Soul Lore. It's not that expensive. I think it's about $15, and you can only get it on lulu.com, which is it's kind of a self-publishing house, but they publish all the stuff for the Troth. But let me just read you this is where I got this brief summary of each soul. And then she talks about the evolutionary aspect of each soul, which is really important. But then she talks about things like, let me just read this to you. She has a whole chapter here about hell as the hidden land, faring to the edge of hell. And then she goes through all the stories that occur in the mythology that have anything to do with hell. So, Horvair, Hermorder. So the story that I told you about the berserker, the daughter of the berserker, that's the first story that she talks about. But then she also talks about Brunhild's ride to hell. Brunhild, of course, is a famous Valkyrie. Baldur's dreams, her mother's journey, and then other stories. And then she talks about the soul. Where does Suelo come from? And various aspects about that. And then there's this interlude, a short essay on the Araman soul, and then there's this whole thing about alchemy and the coalescence of hell. And she has it's like 6-part, huge, it's like 150 pages of hell, and what hell is about, what the Dwemer is. There's rituals in here. There's some of it is her own gnosis, but it's all based on her learning and experience.
Yeah.
So if you're
have this little Puerto Rican girl convert to some Nordic stuff here because it's just so juicy.
So if hell is where you want to go, I would recommend this book because it's not expensive. And she's the only person who's really kind of pulled all this stuff together to do this, and in a way that's workable, manageable, and it helps you to think about all the different levels that and she does some cross-cultural connections too, although she tries to stick to the Norse stuff. But it's the way that she does it will enable somebody reading it to be able to connect it to other things that they're doing. You know what I mean? Other things that they may have come in contact with. So, that's what I would do. I would start with the Turnip Princess and her book, and then
send you a bunch of emails because that's what's going to happen with me. I'm going to read those 2 books and then I'm going to just send you a bunch of emails because
that's fine with me. That's fine.
Which reminds me, where where can people find you? Are you open and available to the public in terms of teaching or doing online classes, or do you have any books in the works? Which, by the way, you guys, I'm gonna put her your most recent book out in the comments section below
Okay.
once this live is
Right.
over. But like,
Um,
what are you up to these days, and how can people get a hold of you?
right now, honestly, I've been working a lot, so I haven't really. I've been doing a lot of blogging on my website, which is professorwham.com.
All right,
So
let's
if you
do
go to
it.
professorwham.com, you can see my latest blogs. Unfortunately, I can usually only get one done a month because I work so much. But you can see my blogs. You can see a lot of interviews that I've done. You can see all the things that I'm interested in, all the things that I've, kind of done, including the 2 books that I have, which, by the way, both the books, Mysterious Beauty, and that's the Living with the Paranormal in the Hudson Valley, and then the book of short horror stories, which is called Final Season. Both of those are now out on Audible, and
Yay!
they have been narrated by an extraordinary human being, a wonderful, wonderful job he did. And so I would, if you don't want to purchase a book, purchase it on Audible, and they just did a great job. It's raining here. How bizarre. Anyway, I just realized it's raining. So I'm so glad my chickens are in their coop, because it's cold outside. But what I hope to do is in the next year or two, and it really depends on how I can sort of mold my life around this. What I hope to do is to be able to begin a process of at least online, at least on YouTube. This is, of course, if we all survive. Beginning a process of putting up, because the blogs that I do on my website, I do a blog, but then I also do an audio visual version of the blog. Okay, so that if people want to listen to it, they can do that. Oh, hi, person. So if people want to listen to it, they can do that. And usually if you listen to it, I always add a little bit of additional information. There's like graphics and visuals and me sort of ad-libbing. And so it's usually a little bit more information. But I'm hoping to do some stuff like that to talk a little bit about some of the spiritual practices that I do, to just sort of help people through this time that we're living in.
I hope so. I hope you get to do that. I want you to do that so bad. So whatever I can do to help to get you to do that faster. Yesterday. Let's do it yesterday.
Well, if we, I mean, the main thing that I would like, I don't have a problem with my job. I would just prefer a job where I didn't have to commute so much far. I have to commute almost an hour a day. An hour, like 2 hours a day. And it just wrecks my time. And, but I'm not going to complain about it because it came during the pandemic and I really needed it and it's helped me a lot. So, it's just a matter of trying to figure out how to do stuff. It's like everybody else, everything else, trying to find a balance, for it. Now, I do occasionally get asked if I'm open to do rune readings or rune workings. That is really up to the individual. Because I don't charge for those services. So because I'm forbidden by my order, because of an oath I took, I cannot make a living doing spiritual work. That's just not, I'm not permitted to do that. So I only do that stuff on occasional things. Like I did it for you because you were asking specific questions about Hela, so I did that for you. But I don't do that as like a paid thing that I will do. A lot of times if people want to ask me questions, then I may or may not get, the directive to pull some runes or do something with that. But it's not something that I advertise, I can also read tarot cards, but I will not do these things publicly. So,
Well, I read in your bio too that you now are a master teacher and an initiator.
right.
So if there are people who are interested in the Sufi tradition and would, now that they've met you via this live and kind of gotten an opportunity to see your personality, if they're interested in Sufism and maybe have a few
Absolutely.
questions, would they be able to reach
Absolutely.
out?
Absolutely. You can, my best email for that is Professor Wham numeral 1 at gmail.com.
Okay.
It's Professor
And that's
Wham.
professor with the whole word professor?
Professor, yeah, the whole word. Professor Wham with then a numeral 1 at the end of it, and at gmail.com. So that's the best way to reach me. That's kind of, and I do get inquiries there from time to time. I have actually gotten inquiries from people that are in your community about Sufi stuff already. I just haven't actually been able to put anything together to do. So, and honestly, part of it is because I'm one of these people that I have to be kind of directed.
Right.
Because I have too many ideas, too many things that I could do. So if people come and ask me to do certain things, like, can you do something on this? Can you do something on this? Then I can usually come up with something to do. But for
I'm
me,
the same way. I can't just come up with these one-off spin-off classes. Like, people have
right.
to request things.
Right. And that's really, and because that provides me my focus.
Exactly.
When I used to do stuff at the Enchanted Cafe in Red Hook before it went away, before the pandemic, um, I was always doing stuff in response to what people wanted.
Yeah.
It was always, can you talk about the Men in Black? Well, of course I can talk about the Men in Black. Whatever. But I have to receive that focus from other people. Some people can just barf out workshops, and I'm just not like one of those people.
Same.
I've got too many other things in my brain to
Well,
try.
that's what happens. That's what happens when you're literally a human encyclopedia. Again, I will say it every single time we meet. But
Only about some things. Only about some things. There are many things about which I know nothing, and I really don't want to know.
we have here such a huge crowd of people that showed up for you
Oh,
tonight,
good,
in
excellent. I'm
support.
glad. I'm
So I
glad.
definitely want to give shout outs. We have Amber here, we have Delamar, we have Marius, we have Rob, we have, of course, Lavetta, we have Christina, we have Sonia. Oh my goodness, there's so many people.
That's good.
We have Anna, and this is because the information that you share is just so, Virgil from Manchester, England, just so profound, and you have no idea how much I appreciate you and your wisdom, and you know and that's why, another reason why I don't want to just invite you on the show just willy-nilly. Like, I do feel every time we end up coming together to do a show, it truly is very purposeful. It's not haphazard. It's not any of that, and that means a lot. It really does. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your wisdom with us, for real.
Of course. I mean, it's an honor to be able to share things.
Well, everybody, that is tonight's show. It was a juicy one. And if you have any more questions, Professor Wen email and website is in the comment section. It will be included down below in the description box. So make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this beautiful Sunday night. May you have a great week ahead. Professor Wham, you too. Thank you so much. And most importantly, you guys remember, this is how we grow. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.